Now, this economic symposium also happens to touch on women in the energy sector. And joining us now to help us understand the role that women can play in ensuring we have more energy circulation around the world, we're joined by Sheila Oparaocha, who is from Energia International. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, the role of women, we say, is mostly felt when it comes to what is being described as the softer issues. And energy is mainly male-dominated. But then we are seeing a rise of women participation in energy or in the energy sector. Tell us, from your experience with Energia International, how exactly do you think women's participation is growing and interest is growing in the energy sector?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm really happy to be back here in Kenya.
Yeah.
Also, we're very proud that Kenya is hosting this very important 3-day workshop that has brought people from all around the world to discuss what we feel is a very important issue, and that is how can we promote women's economic empowerment through energy access. How are women and energy involved? When we talk about energy, you know, it's really important for everything. We need energy for economic development. We need energy for our social development. You can't cook food without energy. You can't run your machinery without energy. You can't do your farming without energy. When we look at who is engaged in these activities where energy is very important, it's both men and women. But we do see that women and men tend to occupy sometimes different sectors. So that, for instance, we find that women are very much involved in collecting fuel wood and in using that fuel wood for the household. Unfortunately, when we don't pay attention to these particular roles of women, we find that a lot of policies and a lot of investments tend to ignore the very important role that women play and tend to concentrate more on the sectors that men are more engaged in, and we are here trying to readdress that area.
So when we talk about women in energy, I know that this is a very broad issue, but what specific sectors in the energy?
Yes. So where we find that it's really important to work with women, where women have a comparative advantage and they're dominating, are in sectors such as your improved cook stove, so the GCOs as they're commonly called in Kenya. We also find that in the off-grid lighting in areas, particularly in our rural areas, where it's too expensive to extend our grid, where large-scale energy infrastructure does not reach, that we can use solar systems, from the solar lights all the way to the solar home systems, to run your televisions, to run your radios, to charge your mobile phones, to run your fridges. This is an area and in a business and in a sector where we find women are predominant and succeed and can help build. Also, when we talk about fuels in terms of briquettes, which is a more environmental friendly type of fuel, we find that women tend to excel in producing these types of fuels and in selling them. So if in those areas, really in the rural and remote areas where we don't have energy access, I think you know that only 9% when you talk about your rural electrification rate amongst the population in Kenya, it's only 9%, and it even gets less in urban areas. It's these type of areas where we find that women excel, because the type of energy that we need to energize this area are the type of the sectors that women are very dominant in.
All right, so we are predominantly looking at women in the rural areas, but how about women in the urban centers?
Yes.
Are there any specific areas of energy that you're looking at to help them as well get empowered? Is there any awareness that is being created to help women pick up interest in the energy sector?
Yes, definitely. Areas? Yes. So the rural areas, of course, are very important, but that doesn't leave out the urban areas. And in the urban areas, as you know, you have a growing population of young women, professional women, who are looking for jobs, who are educating themselves. And they're not just interested in educating themselves in the soft sectors. Those are really important, but also in the technical sectors, where a lot of young women ambitious and are growing. And what we are trying to do is to really emphasize that when you really compare how women are performing in these sectors, in some cases they're outperforming men in the technical sectors. Studies have been done by Goldman Sachs that have looked at companies. They looked at really growing companies all around the world. It was over 100 companies. They looked at companies that had employed women and what that meant in terms of the returns of investments to their shareholders. And they found that there was really a much better, a stronger return on investments to shareholders in companies that actually had employed women in these technical areas in the energy sector. So we're also focusing on really changing our mindset and building on the talent that we have with our women to engage in
so I'm curious, which are the areas of opportunity for women to tap into right now in the energy sector, let's say in Sub-Saharan Africa and Kenya particularly?
Okay. So one of the things in Kenya, if I talk in particular, we feel that, for instance, there's a lot of emphasis on geothermal. And this is a new and upcoming sector, so it's something where you can look for opportunities, you can look for change, and we feel that this is one of the areas where we can really tap and use the potential of women, both in the technical side, but even, you know, when you're doing geothermal, it's all about contracts, it's about law that we can use. We can use that talent. Aside from that, in Kenya, we have a growing industry in the renewable energy sector. The renewable energy sector in Kenya is one of the fastest growing in Africa and definitely in the world. And this is also another area where we're seeing there are a lot of opportunities to employ women, both as entrepreneurs, but also in, for instance, installing these systems in homes, in running them, in repairing them. So these are areas and sectors that we certainly can work with.
All right. And going forward, I also hope that, you know, there is going to be some sort of incentives that are given to women, you know, in such a sector like energy. But if there are any, what kind of incentives are given to women to help them as well support themselves and also empower other women in the energy sector?
Yes. So one of the incentives, this is exactly what we're talking about. Building, we've come together to really share our experiences, to see what really works for women in the sector. And one of the things that have come out is capacity building and training. That is one of the areas and one of the incentives that, that if we provide, tends to attract more women into this area. And in doing this, it's also capacity building, not just on the technical side, but also on the business. Building their business skills, how do you run a proper business, how do you manage your investments and your funds, that's another one. The other thing, of course, with any business person, with any sector, is money and financing.
Right.
So that's another thing that we're here at this meeting, we're talking with our financiers. How do we develop instruments that our financial institutions can use that can really be affordable and are suitable to our women, and at all levels, at the higher level, but even at the lower level. How do we use structures that are already available? In Kenya, you have a huge potential in your table banking. Women in Kenya know how to manage money, and they know how to invest that money. How can we tap into that and use it to build up the energy sector? So building financial instruments that can be absorbed and can be used by groups such as table banking is another thing.
All right.
Also,
so looking at it in a more conclusive way, do you think that we have good infrastructure enough to help support the creation of these other, you know, energy sectors? Like, because, you know, you talked about renewable energy or geothermal energy for that matter, but do we have this infrastructure in place to help women tap into these areas?
It's the issue is not the technology, and it's not the energy source. We have geothermal, we have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of biomass. So the issue, and we've got a lot of JICOs have been, in fact, Kenya has been the role model of how a JICO is made to the rest of the world.
But that's what everyone says,
so
we have a lot of sun.
Yes, I do think that we do have the technology, but what we need to do is we need to get the right instruments in place. We need to get the right policies in place. We need to get the right financing in place. We need to get the right capacity building. We have the women in place that are running businesses in this area, that are using things like table banking, where they've got startup capital, but they're struggling with a lot of challenges. So it's really, it's not the technology, it's really the additional factors to make that work for us and to make that work for women in the energy sector.
All right. So you said we have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind, and why aren't we doing this? Because there are studies that actually suggest that if only we tapped or harnessed 5% of our solar, would be able to power up the entire world. Why is this not happening? Because all of this potential is in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, exactly. So I think part of it is because it's where we direct our policies. I think that right now there's a lot of awareness about increasing the share that renewable energy plays in our energy mix, and having policies that are really going to unlock, provide the environment that unlocks that potential, that brings in the private sector to invest, that mobilizes the women to actually be engaged in disseminating that. So we need to have the right policies. I think the political will is there, but we still need to go a step further and have the right policies. And for instance, we had representation from our Ministry of Energy at this conference, who was talking about these issues and really explained to us what government is doing in terms of setting up new and ambitious plans, changing the plans in order to provide, changing plans and policies in order to provide an environment where we can work on renewable energy. Also with government providing the right environment where private sector can come in, financiers can come in, really having that conversation with financiers to say the energy sector, particularly renewable energy sector, and renewable energy sector serving rural communities is an area that you can invest in and that you can make money. Right. And that groups such as women are ones that can do that. So I think it's really having the right policies and instruments in place.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sheila. Sheila Oparaocha is the International Coordinator and Program Manager at Energia